Hi, welcome to the Debrief. I'm Donna King, editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. Welcome back. We've got a lot of news going on this week here in North Carolina, but we're going to start with some big ones. And if the name DeCarlos Brown rings a bell, we're going to be talking more about the latest news on that Charlotte murder. So first joining us, of course, we have Mitch Kokai, senior political analyst for the John Locke Foundation, and, of course, David Larson, managing editor of Carolina Journal. CJ, all right, we have a lot going on here in North Carolina, lots of news, and if the name DeCarlos Brown rings a bell, we're going to be talking more about the latest news about that Charlotte light rail killing. So a lot going on right now, a lot of details, a lot of politics. Let's actually jump right in. So the story you've been hearing a lot about, DeCarlos Brown is a suspect in the Charlotte light rail killing murder in August of this year, of 2025. And it turns out that the North Carolina Department of Corrections released a list of about 3,500 people during a settlement process with former Governor Roy Cooper. Turns out DeCarlos Brown was on that list of convicted folks that were going to be released, but it turns out he was already out. And so, that's the big question. What is the political situation? So that 2021 settlement was reached when the North Carolina ACLU, the North Carolina NAACP, and other activists sued Governor Roy Cooper, if you can kind of remember back during COVID, and they wanted folks to get out of they wanted early release for a lot of people who were in prison during the COVID pandemic, and they said that prison population needed to be reduced to prevent the spread of COVID. The question is, though, DeCarlos Brown may have already been out, but who else was on that list? What are you hearing, if you would? So Channel 9, WSOC really did a good job. Joe Bruno did a good job with this story. Let me lay it out. So first, 2015, Brown was convicted of robbery with a dangerous weapon. He was released September 20th, 2020, and then arrested again in February of 2021. The release, February 6th of 2021, Cooper signed the settlement February 25th. So he was already out. He was on probation, but he was on that list. Tell me about, we've got a little bit of politics going on, but certainly this is an alarming situation.
Well, sure. The only reason this is really cropping up is because of the election. We've got Roy Cooper running against Michael Whatley for essentially both of them will have to win their primary races coming up in March. But it looks as if it'll be the former governor, Roy Cooper, against the former state and National Republican Party chairman, Michael Whatley, for an open U.S. Senate seat. And one thing that's been latched onto by Republicans was, in their effort to portray Roy Cooper as soft on crime, was that he released 3,500 prison inmates, all of whom were supposed to be people who did nothing violent. They were just some property crimes, or maybe they were in for drug crimes or something like that, but not anything that really led to violence against someone else. But they said, well, but one of the people was DeCarlos Brown, who we know is violent. He was in and out of the justice system 14 times. He is the one who is charged because it's shown on video that he stabbed Irina Zarutska to death on the Charlotte light rail line, and so got national and even potentially some international attention because of that. So that's the political angle of this, that Republicans are saying that Roy Cooper released this guy as part of his standard soft on crime policies. The Cooper administration responded saying, well, no, this is not true. He was not released as part of this settlement that you're talking about. And so there's back and forth about this. I'm guessing that there is going to be some concern about other people who were released, but it's hard to say until they commit something else.
Right.
I mean, and also remember we're talking about a settlement that took place during the COVID era, 2021. That stabbing death took place 4 years later. It's not as if DeCarlos Brown was released from prison and then 2 weeks later he stabbed Irina Zarutska, and so you could really say, oh, gee, this is a direct tie. This guy who should have been in prison has just got out and just committed another crime. I haven't looked at his records, but I'm guessing that there are probably other times between 2021 and 2025 when DeCarlos Brown was involved in the legal system. We already know of at least one in which he appeared before a magistrate, and the magistrate let him go, and that already created its own furor in the time that people were coming up with what eventually became Arenas law. So my guess is this is going to be something that voters really won't be paying much attention to by the time they head to the polls in the fall when it's Cooper against likely Whatley.
Right. No, so we're still talking about a release. You know, he was in jail for robbery with a dangerous weapon. Why was he on this list if he had already been released?
Yeah, it looked like, Cooper wanted to settle, and so they put 3,500 names on this list. I have some questions whether there's a little bit of sue and settle sort of things where these are left-wing, maybe allied groups,
right.
And it might have been they didn't have to twist Cooper's arm too hard to get him to do this. And other issues, they've had a lot of trouble with having enough, people in the prisons working. And so they had that issue too. They really wanted to get people out of the prisons anyways.
Right.
So maybe they didn't have to do that. Twist his arm too bad, but the name was on the list because they were trying to find 3,500 people that could be part of the settlement to say we're complying with this and we're in good faith here, and so they put his name on there as somebody who'd already been, I guess he was on a sort of a
probation of some sort,
a parole release, and then rather than send him back to jail, they just continued the terms of the parole release,
right,
and so. In that sense, they're like, see, we're not putting him back in jail. So to me, that doesn't really excuse away that. I think it still could be bad for Cooper there because he did use Brown as, I'm not going to have this guy in jail. See,
right.
We're doing that. We're keeping people out of jail that others might think are dangerous and should be in jail. So that was Berger's point, I think, is he said, okay, who are the
Senate
other
Leader Phil Berger,
3,499 people that Phil Berger was, the Republican Senate leader, was saying, there could be a lot of other dangerous people there that maybe they were just not sent back to jail like Brown, or maybe they were actually released. But either way, maybe they should have stayed in jail. So that's kind of my thoughts. Is there could also have been a bad image on Cooper for this, just for the fact that they were probably allied groups, and he didn't have to have his arm twisted too much to go along with it.
Sure.
And one reason why Brown's name might have been on the list, even though he was already out, was this is probably something that took place, the negotiations over the course of months, and they came up with a list, and by the time the list was finalized, Brown and maybe even...
Yeah, because it was only like 10 days later.
Yeah, and maybe Brown and maybe even some others were already out.
Right.
But they were on the list that had been developed weeks or even months.
Do you think
earlier.
this indicates a broken system, that because we don't know who else is on that list?
Well, there are many things that indicate a broken system. This, to me, the real issue was, did it make sense to have this deal in the first place back in 2021, where you release people early from prison rather than having them fulfill their full sentences? The idea, as David was talking about, was this is during COVID. There was an initiative to try to get some prisoners out. There probably was not a huge fight between the Cooper administration and the outside left-of-center groups that wanted to do this. And so the deal was probably not one that was really adversarial. It was more two sides that were both kind of on the same page on this, and they came up with a list of people to do that. That in and of itself is of concern. But what you were referencing from Senate Leader Phil Berger is something that I think a lot of people who are looking at this would wonder, and that is, well, who else was there? I mean, we know DeCarlos Brown because he's gotten now national and maybe even international attention because of this crime that he committed later. But how many other people who were part of this have gone on to commit other crimes, or if they haven't, they potentially could, and they still should have been in jail rather than have this special deal that was worked out between Cooper's administration and some left-of-center, get everyone out of jail type groups.
Sure.
I think it also shows the momentum, how quickly it can shift between different, because for a while there's a lot of momentum behind the idea of let's let a bunch of people out of the prisons and let's maybe don't worry about the details on some of them, history of violent crime, all of that. And now we swung, after some serious incidents where that would be a completely politically, unviable idea for the Democrats. Josh Stein's not going to get to the podium and say we're going to really start to release a lot of people early. So it just shows how much can shift based on what's going on.
Huge change, and even lawmakers now are going to be looking into this. So we've got recently a judge said he's not going to limit what lawmakers want to know from this Charlotte crime hearing, this oversight commission that wants to really look into how this happened on Charlotte's light rail.
Yes, and that's just one of the things that they're looking at. This committee, which is the House Select Committee on Government Oversight and Reform, they had scheduled a couple of meetings that basically were just going to be bringing in Charlotte officials, and my guess is browbeating them, saying, what are you doing? What's going on down there? Why are things going so poorly? The second time that it was delayed and was pushed back to now being scheduled next week, the reason the lawmakers delayed it was they said, wait a minute, there's this federal court order that says we're not allowed to release anything from the criminal investigative file of the case of DeCarlos Brown and his charge of murder in the case of Irina Zarutska. And so they wanted to get clarification from the federal courts about, are we going to be able to do this hearing? What can we say about this case? So they filed their own court document in late January that said, look, we're planning this hearing. We're going to talk about things that are already in the public about this case. Unless we hear from a court otherwise, that's what we're going to do. And U.S. District Judge Kenneth Bell this week put out just a one-page order that basically said, that's fine. I'm going to schedule a hearing so you all can come and talk about your complaints about this order, because one of the other things that lawmakers said was they thought that the order was invalid and unconstitutional when it applied to them, and they hadn't had a chance to contest this order at all. So Kenneth Bell set up this hearing that's going to take place on the 11th for lawmakers to come and explain their concerns. But meanwhile, he said that the plans that they spelled out, that they were going to talk about this case and just rely on things that were already in the public record, not bring out anything else from the criminal investigative file, that seems to be consistent with the order. So he's basically indicated he's not going to say don't hold the hearing or you're going to be in contempt or you better not talk about this or talk about that. He said if you stick with what you said you're going to talk about, that should be fine. That's consistent with what the federal order said. And I'll have a hearing down in my courtroom where you can complain about this order and how it impacts you.
Sure. I think we're also probably going to hear a little bit about Mecklenburg County's sheriff during this.
That's one of the main things that's in there. Mecklenburg County Sheriff has been invited. The mayor of Charlotte has been invited. The DA from Mecklenburg County has been invited. It's basically a what's going wrong with Charlotte in terms of crime and public safety meeting. You could tell that by the way that it's been described by one of the committee co-chairs, Brendan Jones, who's also the House Majority Leader. He's basically described it as failure and not having things run properly. So we know how he's coming at it. We don't know that that's going to be the entire piece of this puzzle, but that seems to be the direction that they're going, that something's wrong with crime in Charlotte, and the legislators want to know what the people in charge are going to do about it.
Sure. I was in Charlotte visiting my daughter, as you know, and right after that light rail murder. And I think what struck me is even in the wake, the few days after that happened, there was still no security. There's no turnstiles. There's no, officers. There's no, and Charlotte actually does contract with a private company for light rail security, and I still did not see. There was a couple of people in orange vests. There really wasn't any level of security, and that's concerning for public transit. But
and didn't Carolina Journal just run a story about a federal audit that expressed some of these concerns?
Yeah, there really are. It really highlights some real problems that they may be dealing with. But what do you think about the state legislature overseeing, this is North Carolina's biggest city? We have a lot of folks from out of town. We want to protect the citizens there. What do you think about what could come of this hearing process?
I think it's something that's on a lot of people's mind. It was a very high profile, killing that people saw across the country, and they're concerned. A lot of people take the light rail and they want to know they're safe. So I think it is something that's within the legislature's purview. And I know they're looking at it from a bunch of different angles too. So not just the crime and prisons and all of that angle, but I know they're also doing committees about involuntary commitment and the mental health aspect. Josh Stein, I haven't seen exactly what his comments were, but I know he announced something this morning, or he's about to, that he has plans there. I know they might think about creating urgent cares for mental health, I believe, that would be separate from emergency, keep people out of the emergency rooms and have different processes. But I think, the legislature is looking at this from a number of angles and saying, this is our major city, and these are also problems, what you see in the biggest cities, happening to a lesser degree across the state. You see the same kind of issues with drugs, with mental health, with safety, and people concerned of, especially when something's high profile, that people get scared of things like that. And they want to know that they'll be safe and their kids will be safe.
Right. And Gary McFadden, Mecklenburg County Sheriff, he's going to be under fire for this because he has been one of maybe a handful, 10 or so sheriffs who have not been willing to cooperate on our ICE detainers. Now, DeCarlos Brown would not have qualified, would not have fallen under that, but he's definitely getting a lot of attention from the state legislature because he said, look, I don't have the legal right to honor ICE detainers, that I don't need to do that, and that they're going to grill him about that issue, given what we're seeing in Minneapolis, for sure.
And remember, one of their colleagues, Carla Cunningham, actually was part of a petition trying to remove McFadden from office. So we know that there's already some friction between Sheriff Gary McFadden and at least some members of the General Assembly.
Right, it's a hot mess down there. All right, we're going to move on to another topic, of course. We're all paying attention to the 2026 elections. Make sure you head over to carolinajournal.com and johnlocke.org and let us know what you think. If you can comment here, you're watching this on YouTube. All right, voter rolls and identity verification. We've been talking a lot about this year. The North Carolina State Board of Elections is trying to go back to thousands and thousands of North Carolinians to confirm their identification because they, too, had a lawsuit, settled a lawsuit with the federal government. Federal government said, you've got way too many people on your voter rolls whose identities are not confirmed. The new State Board of Elections said, we're going to get this straightened out. So now we've got 200, almost 250,000 people who are going to be getting new letters asking them to confirm their identity, right?
Yes, and this is separate from the issue that actually had that lawsuit between the U.S. Justice Department and the Board of Elections.
Yeah.
So that was over an issue dealing with the Help America Vote Act, where HAVA says that if you register to vote, you have to provide a driver's license number or last 4 digits of a Social Security number. And as it turned out, might have been a decade or so, the State Board of Elections did not have a form that mandated that. And so there were a number of people who registered to vote. They didn't do anything wrong, but it was the election officials who did something wrong by not forcing them to provide one of those numbers. That produced a lawsuit from the Republican Party. It was part of the Jefferson Griffin versus Allison Riggs case, and it prompted a lawsuit in May of 2025 from the U.S. Justice Department that was eventually settled in September. And as part of the settlement of that, the State Board of Elections put forward what they called the Registration Repair Project, where they sent mailings to people who they had the voter registration for, but they didn't have one of those numbers. And they said, look, you got to fill this out. If you don't, you're going to have to cast a provisional ballot when you vote in the future. And so that initially targeted more than 100,000 people. As of a court filing that took place, I believe it was late last week, more than 30,000, 32,000 plus of those records have now been filled out, which means that 70,000 plus still have not filled out that information. And if those folks go to vote, the policy is that they're going to have to cast a provisional ballot rather than cast a normal ballot. They can't be removed from the voter rolls, though. This is actually a separate issue. This is a separate issue where the board took that information and then tried to check it back against other government databases. And they found with these 241,000 people who they're going to send a letter to that the numbers and data didn't match. That they wanted to make sure that there was a correct match. And some people might look at this and say, oh, this is some nefarious thing that there are 240,000 people who shouldn't have voted. In most cases, that's not going to be what happened. In most cases, it's going to be that people's names in one record, in one government record,
right,
don't match the name in another record,
or a maiden name, or something.
Well, because there's a hyphen in one,
sure,
or there's not enough hyphen, or you've got the names are run together in one place, or maybe it was spelled slightly differently in one place or another. And so that is what they're doing here in this case. They're trying to make sure that the names and the numbers in their database match the names and the numbers in other government databases. And in this case, unlike that registration repair project, it's not going to affect people and their ability to vote. If you go to cast a ballot and you're on this list, the list of the 240,000 people, you'll vote just as you normally would. And the poll workers are supposed to ask you whether you want to update your information.
Right.
But it's not going to have any impact on whether you get to vote a traditional ballot or not. You will. The only reason you would have to vote a provisional ballot is if you have to vote for some other reason.
Sure.
So, and they also said in the news release that went along with this that this is going to be something that they're going to do twice a year going forward. That they're going to say, you know, if we have a problem with matching up this record with another record, we're just going to send out these letters. We're going to do it twice a year, and it's the whole idea is to make sure that their voter rolls match what they should.
Sure.
That they don't have a bunch of people on the voter rolls who shouldn't be there.
You think this will inspire some confidence in the system? Because I know that there's been over the last few years, people are a little worried about, you know, illegal votes cast or a nefarious plot. But North Carolina seems to be doing something about it. What do you think?
I think, sadly, the people that you'd want this to create the confidence are the kind of people that Mitch said this isn't some nefarious thing where most of these people have been voting. And I think maybe a lot of those people will probably see it as, oh, we've had 241,000 people that who knows who they are. But it's good that we get to the bottom of it and get standardization. You know, maybe somebody put the wrong date or make sure they are who they say they are. Some of them, you know, you might come across somebody who's in two places or something like that. You know, being the 250th anniversary, I'll just throw this in there. It's kind of funny. There didn't used to be such standardization. It was interesting, like with Raleigh, Sir Walter Raleigh, they have like 8 different ways he would spell his name. So it would have been a disaster if they tried to do this, you know, back then, because like the way the city of Raleigh is spelled wasn't even the most common way. He wouldn't put the I in there.
Really?
Yeah, but he also sometimes had a W. So thankfully, at least we all have.
I'm trying to think of where you put the W in Raleigh.
He did R-A-W-L.
Okay.
Really?
Oh,
yeah.
So like
but I mean, apparently
just trying new things.
Apparently, you just wake up and however the spirit led you, you just wrote it down. But thankfully, we have more standardization, and if there's any mismatch, how you spelled it one day or the other, they'll check that. And so I think it should give people more confidence. Whether it will, that's another matter.
What do you think about this idea of being able to change your registration, your party affiliation at the DMV? That's something that had popped up because there's a sheriff candidate that I can't remember what county. He accidentally just fat fingered.
He said Wilson County.
Right. Yeah. He said it was a fat thumb thing that he accidentally.
And people on the other side said no. What really happened was he's trying to replace a Democratic sheriff, and he thought maybe he should go to Democrat, but then he changed his mind.
Sure.
In that case, the change only took place for an hour, so I think his argument seems pretty strong that it was just a mistake and he figured it out. And the other thing is he is registered in a Republican primary, and no Republicans were complaining about this except one other candidate in the race.
Right.
But the Republican Party didn't complain. Republican legislators weren't complaining. So it doesn't seem like it's a Chris Anglin case where it's a phony person trying to get in there just to muck up the works. But you've already reported at CJ that this is something that at least some legislators are looking at, that yes, you have to be able to allow people to register to vote at the DMV, but should they be able to change their party registration at the DMV, or is that something that really ought to only happen at the Board of Elections?
The point the lawmaker made to me, he said, is you don't go over to the State Board of Elections to renew your license plate. Why would you go change your party affiliation at the DMV?
Yeah, it sounded like the DMV was not excited about it maybe, or that because of that, because they're already kind of backed up, that people are already a little frustrated with them.
Yeah, of course.
And so okay, you can fill out this form there while you're at the DMV. I think you can do it at the library too. And different places. But I'm going to say probably, don't clog it up with people, those already long lines of the DMV, with people who are trying to switch from Republican to Democrat.
Right, but they don't have to, but you have to have motor voter. That's a federal law, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
So they have to be able to give them that opportunity to register to vote. But I think the point is
not to make changes.
Do you just limit it to the registration? But any changes once you're registered has to be done through the Board of Elections. My guess is there's going to be at least some attention to that.
You had a great column in Carolina Journal. Head over to carolinajournal.com to read it. But this ballot access idea for smaller parties, we have so many unaffiliated voters in North Carolina. It's got to be empowering some of these small parties, and now ballot access.
Well, the important part of this was, you might remember in the 2024 election cycle, there were a couple of smaller parties that wanted to get on North Carolina's ballot that were running into trouble.
Right.
One of them was the We the People Party that was tied to Robert F. Kennedy. The other one that really caught a lot of attention was Justice for All, which was tied to Cornel West. Both of these were, at the time, Kennedy might not be seen this way now, but at the time these were both seen as left-of-center parties that might take votes away from Democrats. And a state elections board led by Democrats didn't want to see either one of those parties on the ballot. Now, a recent ruling from federal judge Terrence Boyle basically ended the case for Justice for All. Back in August of 2024, he had issued an injunction that allowed Justice for All to appear on the ballot. So his latest ruling really is not going to go back and affect any results from 2024, won't affect any results going forward. But what he said was, what I said in his ruling in January of 2026 was, what I said back in August 2024 still stands. This was wrong. It was unconstitutional to do this. That if you are going to put restrictions on these voters and on candidates who want to align themselves with a new party, the courts are going to apply a strict scrutiny to it, and you better make sure you're not trampling on people's rights. And what happened with this Board of Elections in 2024 was unconstitutional. Now, he also shut down Justice for All's attempt to kind of keep this lawsuit going so they could challenge current ballot access rules. He said, no, there's no reason to do that because it's not ripe. That no one has said you can't try to get back on the ballot again. But what he did say, which was important, was when a state elections board steps over the line and keeps these parties off the ballot in a way that seems to be trampling on rights, that is unconstitutional, and that could have a positive effect for these third parties moving forward.
Sure, and this happened with the Green Party too, right?
Absolutely. That was a big story for us in 2022.
Huge.
In 2022, the Green Party actually reached out to us and we talked to them, and they had a video of, there were actually people connected to ostensibly to the Democratic Party and to Mark Elias that were calling all the people who had signed the petition to make the Green Party an official party and to run Matthew Hoh as a U.S. Senate candidate.
Right.
And they were trying to convince people, and they would harass them. They would
call there's video of them coming up to their front door.
Yeah. And they'd be like, I've already told you 20 times I signed the petition, and I'm glad I signed the petition. And they're like, but do you know that if Matthew Hoh's on there, that's going to take votes away from the Democrat, and then the Republicans are going like, I know, but they'd have to argue with these people every day because they would call and they'd come by their house. And I think, just that kind of action that was seen as a potential avenue, I think a lot of people put a bad taste in their mouth that, okay, so this party did all the work to get their signatures, but you can have a very well-funded, powerful group, Mark Elias and the Democratic Party, try to just whittle away at all these people who signed and harass them until they take their names off. And there wasn't really even a process necessarily in the legal realm for how to remove your name from a petition once you'd already signed it. And so it created a lot of chaos. So it's good to see that, I guess the federal courts are going to give a little more leeway that, okay, they have enough signatures. Maybe we don't take such a if you're going to have scrutiny, it's got to be more strict rather than some blunt thing where you just throw out all their ballots just because you don't like that they that they'd be on the ballot.
Sure.
And it's good that David brought up the Green Party, because that was one of the things that prompted Judge Boyle to do what he did with the Justice for All Party, because the State Board of Elections had argued the case is moot. The election's over. The Justice for All party was on the ballot. They didn't get enough votes to stay on the ballot, so now they're not even a party in North Carolina anymore. But Judge Boyle said, no, this is one of those cases that's an exception from what they call the mootness doctrine, where a case ends because there's no controversy anymore. And he said the reason that it's an exception is because this is the exact same thing that happened to the Green Party 2 years earlier.
Sure.
And it's the type of thing that could be repeated. And if it happens each time, and each time it happens, the party goes away and it becomes moot, then the State Board of Elections is going to do the same thing over and over again. And that's why he stepped in and said, no, we're gonna keep this as a live case, and we're going to say that what they did was unconstitutional.
Very interesting. All right, we're going to be following that and a lot of other stories on CarolinaJournal.com. Make sure you comment. Let us know what you think, and we'll keep that conversation going. Thanks so much for tuning in.